Evan Hale had never expected to wake up on a world that looked like a dream filtered through a prism of alien architecture. Towering spires shimmered with hues he had no names for, and streets hummed with a life rhythm unlike anything on Earth. Humanity had long reached the stars, but they were still young compared to the ancient empires they now encountered. This world belonged to the Elythians, a proud species with skin that shimmered like liquid metal and eyes that held the weight of centuries. And the princess, Sailthira, was at the center of it all. Evan had been assigned to the palace under a pretext of observation, a diplomatic liaison of sorts. In truth, humans were tolerated here, admired only for their technological cleverness and unpredictability, but never truly trusted. His quarters were a luxurious cage, walls of smooth, iridescent material, soft light that followed his movements, and doors that seemed to listen even when closed. The silence was deeper than the quiet of space. It was the silence of a species that measured everything and trusted almost nothing. He had arrived weary. Months of negotiations, hours of translating alien customs, and the constant pressure of representing all of humanity had left him physically exhausted and mentally frayed. He tried to immerse himself in the palace routines, to memorize the formal gestures, the subtle bows, and the correct tonal modulations for speaking to Elythians. He knew any mistake could undo years of fragile diplomacy. And yet, at night, in the darkness of his chamber, he allowed himself to be human. On one particular evening, after a long day of diplomatic briefings, Evan collapsed onto the soft platform that served as his bed. His mind was clouded with the day's events, debates on interstellar trade, arguments over border disputes, and constant reminders of humanity's supposed weakness. His body ached from the unfamiliar gravity adjustments, and his thoughts wandered to the distant blue planet he called home. As sleep claimed him, words began to escape his lips, soft murmurs born of fatigue and truth. "I hope she doesn't see me as weak. She's too clever to be fooled. Humans aren't simple." He paused in his slumber, as if weighing his next thought. "She's not what I expected. Maybe she could understand us if we just had the chance." She had come not because she suspected espionage, but because she was curious. Humans were peculiar creatures, always talking, always moving, and yet somehow clinging to fragile lives with an intensity that fascinated her. Tonight, the human spoke in ways even her best observers could not record, honestly, unguarded, and entirely without ceremony. She listened. His words were fragmented, unsure, and sometimes nonsensical, but there was a rhythm to them, a sincerity that even an ancient mind could not ignore. He spoke of fears, of inadequacy, of failing those who relied on him, of being misunderstood. He spoke of hope, of admiration for her people, and of a wish to belong. And then he whispered the thing that made her pause. "I wish she knew we could be friends, really friends." Sailthira allowed herself a moment longer, savoring the honesty of his words. From that night on, she found herself drawn to his room. Not every night and never directly in sight, but always close enough to hear the soft murmur of a mind unburdened by expectation. Evan did not notice her presence. He was too absorbed in the world of his subconscious, in thoughts and fears and hopes that had no audience except the stars above. The palace, however, did not forgive carelessness easily. Even as Evan slept, the political world outside his chamber moved with merciless speed. Rival factions of Elythians whispered in shadows about the human envoy who had been allowed too much freedom. Some saw him as a potential threat, others as a curiosity that could be exploited. In their eyes, humans were fragile, emotional, and easily manipulated. But Sailthira's laughter lingered in the air, a quiet rebellion against the assumptions of her people. Evan's sleep was restless but honest. On another night, he muttered about the intricacy of Elythian society, about the weight of being a representative of humanity, and about the fear that one small mistake could cost lives. "We are not strong like you, not yet, but we survive, we always survive." His words were simple, but the conviction behind them was undeniable. Sailthira's curiosity deepened. She realized that humans carried something her people had almost forgotten, a stubborn will to endure. They did not rely on ritual, hierarchy, or centuries of tradition to prove worth. They relied on persistence, on improvisation, and on the courage to face the unknown with only their wits and hearts. Listening to him, she understood that this human, small, fragile, and entirely unaware, represented something powerful. Days passed, blending into nights, and Evan continued to speak in his sleep. He told stories of Earth, of oceans and forests, of cities and deserts. He spoke of people he had loved, of mistakes he had made, and of the stubborn hope that had carried humanity through countless crises. Each word was a revelation to Sailthira, who had grown up in a society that prized control and perfection above all else. One night, he spoke of her directly. "The princess, she's clever than anyone, stronger than she knows, maybe she could like me if she understood me." There was hesitation in his voice, a vulnerability that made her pause. The human was not attempting to charm or manipulate. He was simply speaking truth as it existed in his mind, unfiltered by fear or expectation. For the first time in centuries, Sailthira felt a peculiar sense of connection with another being. Not through shared language, not through diplomacy, not through ritual, but through the simple, unguarded honesty of a sleeping mind. She wondered what would happen if humans were given the same respect as her people, if their voices were heard not just in private chambers but in halls of power. She decided to wait, to observe, to listen. There was no rush. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they were also resilient, and in this fragile envoy she saw a spark that might yet illuminate the path between two civilizations. Evan continued to sleep, unaware of the silent witness at the edge of his room. He dreamed of distant stars, of home, and of the impossible notion that a being like Sailthira could understand him without judgment. And each night, Sailthira laughed softly, a sound that carried the weight of amusement, curiosity, and the faintest hint of admiration. The first days of observation were uneventful in the palace, but tensions simmered outside. Negotiations over trade, defense, and territorial disputes continued without pause. Aliens from other systems watched the human with suspicion, expecting weakness. Yet Evan, in his sleep, revealed a strength that no counselor, no soldier, and no diplomat could see at first glance. Sailthira, for all her youth and authority, realized something remarkable. Humans were unpredictable because they were honest in ways her people could not fathom. Their emotions were messy, yes, but that messiness carried resilience, creativity, and the stubborn drive to survive. And if she could nurture that spark, perhaps humanity might prove to be more than the Council expected. On the final night of that first week, Evan muttered as he turned in his sleep, Maybe I can help, maybe we can be something more." Sailthira's laughter echoed softly in the silent chamber. It was a sound that promised patience, curiosity, and the possibility that this fragile human might change more than just her perception. He might change the fate of two worlds. And so the nights continued. Evan slept, spoke, and dreamed, unaware that he was shaping history with every word. Sailthira listened, laughed, and learned, discovering that in the honesty of a sleeping human, there was a courage and strength that even the oldest Elythian traditions could not deny. The morning sunlight filtered through the iridescent walls of Evan Hale's chamber, casting soft, shifting colors across the room. He awoke slowly, stretching and rubbing his eyes, the events of the previous day already slipping from his conscious memory. In the palace, the days were a blur of formalities, foreign language drills, and cautious observation. Yet at night, when his mind drifted into sleep, he revealed truths that he had no way of controlling. Sailthira watched him again that evening. She had learned to move silently, her presence barely more than a flicker of shadow at the edge of the chamber. Each night she came, she listened, amused and intrigued, fascinated by the unfiltered honesty of the human who, in waking life, was careful, polite, and unassuming. She had never encountered a species that revealed so much about itself while entirely unaware of an observer. Evan's words that night were hesitant at first. "I don't know if I belong here. I've never been truly understood. Maybe it's better this way." He paused, then continued in a firmer tone. "But if someone could, if someone truly saw us, maybe they would see we are stronger than we seem." Humans, she realized, were not weaker than her people. They were unpredictable, capable of strength in ways her rigid society had never considered. Their courage was born not from duty or tradition, but from emotion, from hope, and from a stubborn unwillingness to surrender. As days passed, Sailthira began to take careful notes, not formal records, but personal observations. The human slept, talked, and revealed layers of thought that no ambassador had ever shown. He spoke of Earth, its people, and their endless persistence in the face of disaster. He spoke of mistakes, failures, and lessons learned, and he spoke of her often unknowingly. "The princess, she seems more than a ruler she could understand if we just had the chance." She began to see a different kind of strength in them, a strength that did not rely on centuries of tradition or rigid control, but on adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to face the unknown. Evan's sleep-talking became more vivid, more animated. One night, he described a battle from humanity's distant past, a war where their survival seemed impossible. "We were outnumbered, outgunned, but we found a way, always a way." His voice carried awe, pride, and determination, even in slumber. Selthira felt a flicker of admiration. Humans were not only resilient, they were capable of hope that persisted even when logic said survival was impossible. The princess realized that her amusement had shifted into genuine curiosity. She wanted to understand more, not as a ruler observing a guest, but as a being fascinated by the essence of another species. Humans spoke with emotion, yes, but they spoke with honesty, an honesty that her own kind had largely abandoned. Meanwhile, the political world outside Evan's chamber grew more tense. Rival factions of Alithians whispered about the human envoy who had been allowed freedom within the palace. Some saw him as insignificant, easily manipulated. Others feared he might have secrets, unaware of the true nature of his strength. Even among the High Council, opinions were divided. Evan, oblivious to the political storm brewing around him, continued to sleep and speak freely. He described dreams of Earth's oceans, its forests, its cities. He spoke of people he had loved and lost, of mistakes he had made, and of the stubborn hope that had carried humanity through countless crises. His words were simple, but they were filled with a depth of feeling that even Selthira had trouble comprehending fully. One night he spoke of an upcoming meeting with the council, still half asleep. "I have to show them. We are not just clever, we are capable. Maybe they will see, maybe they will understand." The words were raw, unfiltered, and entirely sincere. Selthira felt a connection she had not expected, a quiet admiration for the human who could express such strength without even knowing it. The princess began to wonder what might happen if humans were truly recognized for what they were. Her people had long assumed that emotion was weakness, that vulnerability was dangerous. Yet here was a human whose very emotions gave him resilience, whose honesty could inspire loyalty and courage. She began to imagine a different future, one in which humans were not just tolerated but respected as equals. The next day, Evan walked through the palace halls with his usual cautious politeness. Courtiers and servants watched him, noting the strange calm he carried despite the constant scrutiny. He was careful, precise, and seemingly ordinary, but the truth was different. Beneath his quiet demeanor lay a mind trained in observation, adaptability, and problem-solving. He was aware of much more than he let on, though he would never admit it aloud. Selthira observed him from a distance, fascinated by how much of a person could be revealed in unconscious moments. She remembered the first night she had heard him speak, and she laughed again softly, not out of amusement this time, but out of admiration. There was something about humans that defied prediction, something in their persistence and hope that no Alithian custom could anticipate. As the week progressed, Evan's interactions with the palace staff deepened. He learned subtle cues, recognized alliances and rivalries, and noticed the small gestures that indicated power without words. Each observation was catalogued silently, each movement studied. He was careful to remain polite, non-threatening, and agreeable, but he was not passive. His mind worked constantly, analyzing patterns, anticipating consequences, and preparing for eventualities he could not yet predict. At night, when he slept again, his words became more daring. Maybe we could change things. Maybe we could prove them wrong. Maybe she could see we are more than she thinks." There was a longing in his voice, a wish for connection and understanding that transcended mere diplomacy. Selthira listened, captivated by the honesty and courage embedded in his subconscious thoughts. Her curiosity led her to take small risks. She began leaving subtle tokens near his quarters, small hints that she was aware of his words, small acknowledgments that she appreciated his honesty. Nothing overt, nothing that would alarm the palace staff or expose her interest. Just quiet signals that someone was paying attention. Evan remained unaware, but his mind responded nonetheless. In subtle ways, he felt less alone, more understood, even when no one was consciously present. The political tensions outside the palace continued to simmer. The High Council debated the role of humans in the alliance, questioning their loyalty, intelligence, and reliability. Some counselors argued for limiting human influence entirely, while others warned against underestimating them. The debate was heated, but none of them had considered what Selthira had heard in those quiet nights. The depth of thought, courage, and honesty that humans carried, even when unconscious. One evening, Evan spoke of her directly in his sleep. The princess, she might understand, maybe she already sees, maybe she is laughing at me, but not meanly, maybe she likes honesty. Selthira allowed herself a soft laugh, acknowledging both his words and the delicate thread of truth they contained. There was amusement, yes, but also a spark of recognition. This human was different from any visitor she had encountered. For Selthira, the human's honesty became a lens through which she reconsidered her own society. Her people prized control, strategy, and tradition above all else. But here was a species that thrived through unpredictability, creativity, and emotional strength. Humans faced adversity not by controlling every variable, but by embracing uncertainty and acting with courage. It was a perspective that challenged everything she had learned. Evan's nightly revelations continued, and Selthira began to anticipate them, to read the subtle shifts in his breathing and posture that hinted at the topics his mind would wander to in sleep. Sometimes he spoke of fear, sometimes of hope, sometimes of simple admiration. Each word, each fragment of thought, was a puzzle piece revealing the essence of a species that her people had long underestimated. By the end of the second week, Selthira made a quiet decision. She would protect this human, not out of duty or obligation, but out of respect for what he represented. If others sought to manipulate or remove him, she would intervene. She would observe, guide, and quietly ensure that his presence continued to illuminate truths her people had ignored. And so the nights continued. Evan slept, spoke, and dreamed, revealing the depth of humanity with every murmur. Selthira listened, laughed softly, and learned, discovering in the honesty of a sleeping human a strength that her society had long failed to recognize. She understood that these nights were more than observation. They were a lesson, a glimpse of what might be possible if humans were allowed to act, unbound by prejudice or expectation. Evan, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the silent witness to his thoughts. To him, these were ordinary nights, filled with the wandering dreams of a weary mind. He had no idea that his words carried power beyond comprehension, that his honesty might shift perceptions, challenge assumptions, and plant seeds of change in the heart of an empire. And Selthira, watching from the shadows, smiled. For in the laughter she had first offered in amusement, there was now admiration, curiosity, and a quiet hope that this fragile human might prove the impossible. That honesty, courage, and humanity could change not just minds, but the fate of worlds. The palace was quiet that morning, but the calm was fragile, like the surface of water just before a storm. Evan Hale had learned to expect the unexpected, yet even he could feel the tension vibrating through the halls. Whispers followed him as he moved, soft, cautious, filled with suspicion. He had been aware that not all Elythians welcomed humans, but the scale of scrutiny was becoming impossible to ignore. Selthira watched from a distance, her mind alert. The council had begun questioning Evan's presence, debating the wisdom of allowing a human so close to the heart of their empire. Rumors had spread. Some suggested he was an untrustworthy observer, others whispered that he might be a spy, though none of the counselors could cite evidence. They relied on assumption and habit, judging humans by what they thought they knew, rather than what they had actually seen. Evan, for his part, moved carefully. Every gesture, every word, every pause was measured. He greeted courtiers with polite bows, answered questions with calm precision, and avoided drawing unnecessary attention. Yet no matter how careful he was, there were eyes on him at all times, and he could feel the weight of those eyes pressing down, testing him, measuring him, waiting for him to falter. It was during a morning audience with the High Council that the tension finally reached its peak. The council chambers were vast, with floors of polished metal that reflected the ceiling lights in an endless dance of color. Evan stood in the center, flanked by translators, while the counselors seated themselves in a semicircle above him. Their expressions were sharp, cold, and calculating. A counselor with silver-patterned skin leaned forward, voice cutting through the still air. "Human representative, it has come to our attention that you have had access to areas beyond what is customary for your species. Tell us, what is your purpose here?" "I have followed all protocols and respected all boundaries." He had revealed his thoughts unknowingly, but he did not intend harm. "I cannot speak for my sleep," he admitted honestly. "If I have said anything in unconscious hours, it was not intended as strategy or deception. It is the truth of my thoughts." The room fell silent, every counselor aware that the princess had the authority to influence any decision. She approached Evan, her expression unreadable, though there was a faint smile on her lips. "I have heard this human speak in ways that reveal nothing but honesty," she said, voice calm but firm. "In dreams, he has shown the essence of his species, courage, resilience, and the desire for understanding. He is not a threat, and he has nothing to hide. Human emotion is unpredictable." Still, the council's suspicions were not easily erased. They proposed a trial, a traditional Alithian method to determine truth and loyalty. Evan was to face a mental endurance test designed to break even the most disciplined minds. Failure would be considered proof of weakness or deceit. Evan listened carefully to the instructions, his mind calculating, weighing each step. The trial would be grueling. Isolation, sensory manipulation, and exposure to scenarios meant to provoke fear, confusion, or panic. Most humans would crumble quickly, their species, lack of formal training in such tests leaving them vulnerable. But Evan had prepared himself mentally, drawing on every lesson from Earth's history: resilience in adversity, creativity under pressure, and the ability to turn fear into determination. When the trial began, Evan was led to a chamber unlike any he had encountered before. The walls pulsed with light, shifting colors and patterns designed to disorient. Sounds fluctuated unpredictably, from deafening echoes to near silence. He was asked questions, presented with illusions, and forced to confront fears both real and fabricated. Every instinct told him to panic, to retreat, to find safety, but he did not. He relied on memory, logic, and hope. He recalled stories of human survival, cities rebuilt after disasters, communities thriving in hostile environments, individuals overcoming impossible odds. He reminded himself that humans endured not because they were invulnerable, but because they refused to surrender. Each moment of the trial became a challenge to his mind, a test of patience and creativity rather than sheer strength. Hours passed. To the council observing from above, it seemed inevitable that the human would fail. His species was supposed to collapse under pressure, to falter when faced with mental strain. Yet Evan persisted, navigating illusions, answering questions, and enduring sensory manipulations with calm determination. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, only steady resolve. Saelthira watched silently, pride and curiosity intertwining. She had seen the potential in humans, but witnessing it directly in the trial was remarkable. He was proving that strength was not measured by rigid control or tradition, but by adaptability, courage, and the ability to remain true to oneself under pressure. At one point, a particularly harsh simulation forced Evan to confront a scenario where the fate of entire worlds rested on his decisions. He faltered momentarily, the weight of responsibility threatening to overwhelm him. But he drew on the human trait that had carried him through countless challenges: empathy. He considered the lives involved, the consequences of every choice, and acted not out of fear but out of understanding. The council, silent and tense, began to shift in their perception. Whispers circulated. The human was enduring, responding with clarity and insight that no one had predicted. He was surviving not by suppressing emotion but by embracing it, turning vulnerability into a source of strength. When the trial concluded, Evan emerged exhausted but unbroken. The chamber doors opened and he blinked at the light, his mind racing but clear. Saelthira approached, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You have done more than survive," she said softly. "You have shown the council what they refuse to see, that humanity's strength lies not in tradition or control, but in resilience, courage, and honesty. You are not weak. You are human, and that is remarkable." He realized that his sleep, his honesty, and his endurance had not been meaningless. They had shaped perception, challenged assumptions, and revealed a new kind of strength. The council deliberated, their initial doubts tempered by the undeniable evidence of Evan's resilience. They could not deny the truth. This human, small and fragile by their standards, had endured trials that most Alithians would struggle to survive. And in doing so, he had forced them to reconsider the assumptions they held about an entire species. Saelthira's influence ensured that the council's judgment was tempered with fairness. Evan was not only cleared of suspicion, but his reputation as a capable and resilient envoy began to grow. The political tides were shifting, and humanity's place in the empire was no longer assumed to be minor or insignificant. That night, Evan returned to his quarters, exhausted yet oddly invigorated. He collapsed onto the soft platform, muscles aching, mind racing. His sleep came quickly, deeper than before, and his words began to drift into murmurs, revealing thoughts he had not spoken aloud during the trial. The princess, she believed in me. She saw what I could do. Maybe we are not so powerless. Maybe we can survive anything. This time it was not amusement alone. It was respect, admiration, and cautious hope. She had witnessed the truth of humanity in action, and it had exceeded even her expectations. The trial had ended, but the consequences were only beginning. Evan's endurance had proven more than personal strength. It had opened eyes, challenged traditions, and planted the seeds of change. And in the quiet moments before dawn, Selthira realized that the human she had watched in sleep might do more than survive the Empire's scrutiny. He might change it. The days following the trial were tense, but a subtle shift had taken place in the palace. Evan Hale moved through the corridors with measured confidence. Whispers still followed him, but they were tinged with curiosity now rather than suspicion. His endurance had proven something unexpected. Humans were not fragile, not easily broken, and not to be underestimated. Selthira observed the subtle changes in the council with satisfaction. Her people had long prided themselves on discipline and control, but they had been unprepared for a species that relied on unpredictability, courage, and emotional honesty as strengths. The human had survived a trial that was meant to break him, not through sheer logic, but through persistence, adaptability, and the refusal to yield to fear. Yet outside the palace, unrest was growing. Rival factions of Alithians had taken notice of the shift in perception. The human envoy, once considered inconsequential, was now a symbol of something dangerous. The idea that humans could challenge assumptions, influence opinions, and demonstrate a strength that defied expectations. Plans were whispered in shadowed corridors. Strategies formed behind closed doors. Some saw humans as a threat, others saw opportunity. Evan was unaware of the full scope of these machinations. His days were filled with observation, analysis, and careful diplomacy. He continued to engage with the council and palace staff, noting alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas. Every gesture, every word, every hesitation was catalogued in his mind. He understood that survival depended on awareness, adaptability, and timing. Selthira remained his silent ally. She did not intervene overtly, but her presence was a shield. She guided, advised, and subtly protected him from immediate danger. She had learned to trust his judgment, admire his honesty, and recognize his potential. Each night she listened as he spoke in sleep, revealing thoughts he had not shared consciously. She marveled at the depth of his insights, the quiet courage embedded in his words, and the resilience that allowed him to endure challenges both seen and unseen. One morning, Evan received a summons. The council had convened an emergency session. A faction that opposed humanity had staged an incident. A minor breach of security had been reported, and human negligence was blamed. The accusation was serious enough to justify formal investigation, but vague enough to sow doubt. Evan entered the chamber cautiously, aware that this was a test not of skill, but of perception. The council chambers were filled with tension. The faction that had raised the accusation sat at one side, their expressions sharp, their voices ready to strike. Evan's allies, fewer but resolute, sat opposite. Selthira took her place above, observing with keen attention. The human understood that the outcome of this session could influence not only his standing, but the perception of all humanity within the Empire. The accusation was presented formally. Human negligence, they claimed, had allowed a security breach that could have endangered the palace. Evidence was sparse, circumstantial, but the counselors were skilled in persuasion, using rhetoric to sway opinions. They assumed that humans, emotional and untrained in such traditions, would falter under pressure. Evan's mind worked quickly. He responded with calm precision, outlining procedures, detailing observations, and explaining the sequence of events. He acknowledged areas of human limitation, but emphasized adaptability, corrective measures, and proactive planning. Every word was measured to demonstrate accountability, intelligence, and resilience. The council listened, some skeptical, others intrigued. The faction opposing him pressed harder, attempting to exploit emotional reactions, but Evan remained steady. He had learned that the strength of humanity was not in denying vulnerability, but in acknowledging it, adapting to it, and acting decisively. His composure, combined with clear reasoning, began to shift opinions. Selthira intervened subtly. She presented her own observations, describing not only Evan's behavior but the qualities she had witnessed in his sleep: honesty, courage, and determination. Her words carried weight, reminding the council that evidence was more than procedure. It was character, resilience, and adaptability under pressure. As the debate continued, Evan's strengths became increasingly evident. He proposed solutions to prevent future breaches, demonstrated awareness of the palace's systems, and outlined strategies that incorporated both human ingenuity and Alithian structure. His suggestions were creative, practical, and unexpected, qualities that challenged traditional methods but proved effective. The council's perception began to shift. Where once they saw weakness, they now saw potential. Where once they expected failure, they now recognized adaptability. Where once they assumed humans were simple, they now understood complexity expressed in ways alien to their traditions. Evan's endurance, intelligence, and honesty had not only survived scrutiny, they had reshaped understanding. Outside the chambers, the rival faction grew uneasy. Their attempts to undermine humanity had inadvertently highlighted its strengths. The human envoy, they realized too late, was not fragile or easily manipulated. He had turned vulnerability into advantage, honesty into credibility, and unpredictability into power. That evening, Selthira found Evan alone in his quarters, reviewing notes and reflecting on the day. He was tired, the weight of diplomacy and scrutiny pressing heavily, yet his mind was alert, analyzing, planning, and preparing. "You handled the council well," she said softly, stepping into the room. Evan looked up, surprised but grateful. "Thank you," he replied, voice calm but edged with fatigue. "It's been difficult, but I think I understand more now. Humans survive because we adapt. We find strength in what others see as weakness. Even in the face of tradition, even under scrutiny, you have demonstrated what it means to be human. You have proven them wrong, not by force, but by being true to yourself." The human's words were no longer simple murmurs. They were seeds of insight, resilience, and influence. In the honesty of his sleep, she heard the possibility of a future where humans were not just tolerated, but respected. The following days brought new challenges. Other factions within the empire attempted to test human reliability, presenting scenarios designed to provoke error or hesitation. Yet Evan navigated each with steady resolve. He adapted, improvised, and acted decisively, demonstrating an unexpected combination of creativity and discipline. Where others relied solely on tradition, he relied on understanding, insight, and ingenuity. The palace staff began to notice. Courtiers whispered among themselves, remarking on the human's calm in the face of challenges. Advisors consulted him discreetly, seeking perspectives that combined logic and adaptability. Even the skeptics among the council could not deny the growing evidence. Humanity, they realized, was not simply a weak or unpredictable species. It was resilient, capable of innovation, and capable of enduring trials that would overwhelm others. Evan's influence grew quietly, yet unmistakably. His presence began to shift the balance within the palace, altering perceptions not through confrontation or force, but through demonstration of character. Each challenge he faced became a lesson for the Alithians. That strength was not always measured in control or tradition, but in adaptability, courage, and the quiet persistence to endure. One evening, Selthira approached him after another day of observation. "The council is beginning to understand," she said. "You have done more than survive their tests. You have changed minds, revealed truths, and planted seeds that may grow far beyond this palace. I never imagined that simply being human, being honest and persistent could have so much impact. I thought we were too small, too weak, too simple. Your strength lies in what they cannot control or predict. Your honesty, your resilience, and your courage to endure. Maybe we can survive, maybe we can show them. Maybe this is only the start." His honesty, persistence, and courage were not weaknesses. They were tools that could reshape perception, challenge tradition, and inspire change. And in the quiet moments before dawn, she understood that this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven its resilience, its creativity, and its capacity for courage. The council, the factions, and even the skeptics would come to recognize what she had known all along. Humans were a force that could not be ignored, a species capable of altering the fate of worlds with honesty, persistence, and the refusal to yield. Evan slept on, unaware of the profound influence he had already begun to wield. Selthira's laughter was soft, warm, and full of admiration. The human had survived scrutiny, challenges, and doubt, and in doing so, he had revealed the truth of his species. That humanity endured, adapted, and triumphed, not through dominance, but through being fully, unapologetically human. The palace was alive with movement and quiet anticipation. News of Evan Hale's endurance and ingenuity had spread through the corridors and council chambers. What had begun as skepticism and whispered doubt had transformed into cautious respect, curiosity, and even admiration. Humanity, once underestimated and dismissed, was now recognized as a species capable of strength that defied expectation. Evan moved through the halls with careful confidence, aware of the eyes watching him. Some watched with suspicion, some with cautious approval, and others with genuine intrigue. He had learned to read subtle expressions, to notice slight gestures, and to anticipate reactions before they unfolded. Each step he took was measured, calm, and deliberate, but there was an undeniable energy about him, a presence that carried the weight of endurance and the quiet power of someone who had survived trials that others thought impossible. Scifi observed from above, seated among her advisors. Her expression was calm, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. The human had proven more than his species, resilience. He had demonstrated that honesty, courage, and adaptability were forces that could shift perceptions, challenge traditions, and inspire change. She had laughed when she first heard his sleep-talking, but that laughter had grown into admiration and respect. The day's council session began with a demonstration of new strategies for palace defense and diplomatic engagement. Evan had been invited to contribute ideas, not merely as a human envoy, but as a trusted voice whose perspective was valued. His proposals were unconventional, combining human creativity with practical observations of Alithian systems. Where tradition relied on strict procedure and hierarchy, Evan suggested adaptive methods, contingency planning, and innovative approaches that allowed for unpredictability while maintaining order. Counselors leaned forward, some skeptical, some intrigued. Questions came rapidly, each probing for flaws or oversights. Evan responded calmly, drawing on observation, logic, and insight. He acknowledged limitations without hesitation, offered solutions without arrogance, and demonstrated awareness of both immediate and long-term consequences. Each answer reflected not only knowledge but the resilient spirit of humanity, a willingness to endure, adapt, and act decisively when circumstances demanded. Scifi listened, noting subtle shifts in the council's demeanor. Skepticism softened into consideration, doubt into cautious agreement. The human they began to see was not merely a visitor or a guest. He was a partner, a mind capable of contributing meaningfully to decisions that shaped the fate of their empire. And through it all, he remained humble, polite, and observant, never seeking praise, yet naturally inspiring confidence. After hours of deliberation, the council reached a consensus. Humans would no longer be seen as a minor or disposable ally. Their contributions, strategies, and resilience demanded recognition, respect, and inclusion in decision-making processes. The announcement was met with murmurs of approval, relief, and some quiet astonishment. Even the most skeptical members could not deny the evidence before them. Humanity was more than cleverness. It was endurance, ingenuity, and the courage to act in ways that defied expectation. Later, Evan returned to his quarters, exhausted but alert. His mind was alive with reflection, the events of the day leaving an impression of both accomplishment and responsibility. He had survived scrutiny, adapted to challenge, and proven not only his own worth but the value of his species. And yet, the quietest moments held the deepest significance. He did not know that in the shadows, Scifi watched him, listening to his unspoken thoughts, witnessing the human essence that had so captivated her from the very first night. That evening, as he drifted into sleep, Evan spoke softly, revealing thoughts he had not consciously shared. "We have survived, we have shown them. Maybe they can see who we really are, maybe this is just the beginning." His voice was steady, honest, filled with hope and quiet determination. Scifi listened, smiling softly. The human had spoken the truth again, not for praise or recognition, but simply because it was who he was. And in that honesty she recognized something extraordinary, the potential not just for survival, but for transformation. Humanity could endure, adapt, and inspire change through courage, integrity, and resilience. The following weeks brought both challenges and opportunities. Other factions, once opposed to human inclusion, attempted to test them again, presenting diplomatic dilemmas, logistical puzzles, and unexpected crises. Each time, Evan responded with clarity, creativity, and insight. Where others relied solely on rules or tradition, he relied on understanding, adaptability, and the courage to act decisively. His actions demonstrated that humanity's strength was not in domination or rigid control, but in the ability to think, endure, and respond with integrity under pressure. Sailthira became a quiet mentor and ally, guiding his contributions and ensuring that his perspective was valued. Their interactions remained subtle, built on shared understanding, mutual respect, and the recognition that the human had revealed a truth that challenged centuries of tradition. In moments of quiet reflection, she realized that his honesty and resilience had already changed the empire in ways that could not be undone. One evening, after another long day of council deliberations, Sailthira approached Evan in his quarters. "You have done more than I expected," she said softly. "You have survived scrutiny, proven your value, and inspired respect where none existed before. You have shown the council, and my people, that humanity is not to be underestimated." "I didn't expect to have so much impact. I just tried to do what was right to help to survive and to be honest. I didn't know that could change so much." "You embody that strength, and the Empire has taken notice." He had not only survived, but he had influenced perception, challenged tradition, and demonstrated the enduring value of humanity. That night, as Evan slept, his words drifted into murmurs once more. Maybe this is just the start. Maybe we can do more. Maybe they will finally see." Sailthira listened, a soft smile on her lips. She had laughed when she first heard him speak in sleep, amused by the honesty and vulnerability of an unfamiliar species. Now her laughter was full of admiration, respect, and hope. The following days brought new opportunities for collaboration. Evan was consulted on diplomatic missions, defense strategies, and cultural exchanges. His insights, shaped by human adaptability and resilience, proved invaluable. Factions that had once opposed human inclusion began to seek his counsel, recognizing that his perspective offered solutions they could not have anticipated. In quieter moments, Sailthira continued to observe. She noted how Evan approached each challenge with calm determination, how he learned quickly, adapted intelligently, and responded creatively. His endurance was not just physical or intellectual, but emotional. He embraced uncertainty, remained honest, and acted with courage even when outcomes were uncertain. Each day reinforced the truth she had discovered long ago. Humanity's strength was in its unpredictability, its resilience, and its capacity for integrity under pressure. One evening, as the Empire prepared for a significant diplomatic summit, Sailthira entered Evan's quarters. She moved quietly, aware that he was reviewing notes and plans for the upcoming meeting. "Tomorrow will be important," she said softly. "The Empire is watching, and your contributions will shape not only perception, but the future of human-Alithian relations. I just hope I can do it right, that we can make a difference, that humanity can be seen as it truly is." Evan slept, his unconscious thoughts revealing hopes, reflections, and strategies. Sailthira listened, a soft smile on her face, recognizing that the human's words, even in slumber, carried power. They revealed the essence of a species that endured, adapted, and triumphed through courage, honesty, and persistence. The summit arrived, and the Empire's leaders gathered to witness the collaboration between humans and Alithians. Evan presented strategies, offered insights, and demonstrated the value of perspective shaped by adaptability, observation, and resilience. The council, factions, and advisors listened with attention, admiration, and newfound respect. Sailthira watched, satisfied and quietly proud. The human had exceeded all expectations, not through dominance or cunning, but through the very qualities she had discovered in the first nights of observation: honesty, courage, resilience, and the willingness to endure. Humanity's place in the Empire was now secure, respected, and acknowledged. When the summit concluded successfully, Evan returned to his quarters. Exhausted but fulfilled, he reflected on the journey, from being a guest in an alien palace to becoming a respected voice whose actions had reshaped perception. And in the quiet moments before sleep, he knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven its worth, its resilience, and its ability to inspire change. Sailthira appeared at his side, her presence a silent acknowledgement of all that had transpired. "You have done more than survive, Evan Hale," she said. "You have shown what it means to be human, and in doing so you have changed the future of our world, and perhaps the galaxy itself. I only tried to be honest, to endure, to do what was right. I didn't expect it would mean so much. We survived, we showed them. Maybe this is just the beginning, maybe we can change even more." Humanity's essence, its honesty, resilience, and courage, had been revealed, and the galaxy had taken notice. In the quiet moments before dawn, the palace seemed to breathe with possibility. Humans were no longer underestimated. Their strength was seen, their value acknowledged, and their potential recognized. And for Salthera, the laughter that had first arisen from amusement had become something deeper. Respect, admiration, and hope for a future shaped by honesty, courage, and the enduring spirit of humanity.